Welcome back to Hobby Universe. Today I'm going to be installing the snow blower on the front of the John Deere X590 garden tractor. But this install is going to be a little bit different than a standard install. And the reason for that is the snow blower is an older one. It's a 2012, and it's one I used to run on my older John Deere X530 garden tractor, which was also 2012. I'm no longer using the X530. I got this 2024 X590, but the two are not compatible. Right around, I think it was 2016, John Deere changed how these things attach to the front of the tractors. So I was able to find an adapter kit. I actually worked with my John Deere dealer on that. He didn't know it existed, did some research, found the kit, bought it, and what it's supposed to do is allow me to use an older snow blower, or I also have a snow blade that I use for different things around the house. It should allow me to use those older items on this new tractor. So that's what I'm going to work on today. If you enjoy the video and you learn something from it, I would appreciate it if you would hit that thumbs up button. And if you like the content and you'd like to see more stuff like this, please hit that subscribe button as well. So in this box is going to be that adapter kit that I bought. It is a model number BUC11585. At the time of making this video, which is mid-2024, it was right around $410 plus tax. Haven't opened it yet, getting ready to do that now, but I will tell you the box is fairly heavy. And I don't know if weight is any indication, but I feel like maybe the heavier the box, the more stuff is in here, and the harder it's going to be to do, but we'll see what the difficulty level really looks like. First step is to apply some penetrating oil. In this case, I'm going to use WD-40 to the shaft where it goes into the impeller. So I'll hit that with a little bit of WD-40. And I know these bolts are going to be coming out, so I'm also going to just put a little bit of WD-40 on those shear bolts as well. Next step is to remove the shear bolts. And to do that, you're going to need an 8mm socket. And this is actually going to use an Allen wrench. So these were stuck pretty good. I wasn't recording when I loosened them up initially. There was some cursing involved. They were really stuck, and I didn't think this little wrench was going to have enough grip to be able to do it. I thought I was going to have to get in there with vice grips. There's a lot of corrosion and crap on those, so I'm hoping I have some extras. Usually for anything that takes a shear bolt like this, I try to have a handful on hand. Feels like it's spinning, but it's like it's stripped. It's not coming off there. Okay, so I've been turning that nut for quite a while, and apparently it's stripped out completely. Either the bolt or that nut is stripped because it will not come off. It just spins and spins and spins. So I'm going to have to probably get in there with a little hacksaw and cut that off. That's a bummer. So I've got this hacksaw blade. I'm just going to use that to try to get that off. It's going to take me a few minutes here at least, so I'm not going to make you watch me do that. Next up, we're going to remove 4 carriage bolts. There's going to be 2 on each side of the auger. Now I'm going to remove the carriage bolts from the other side. Now I'm going to remove the nuts and bolts that secure the bracket, the support bracket, to the auger gearbox. Now theoretically, I'm supposed to be able to slide this whole auger assembly away, and then hopefully it comes free from that shaft without fighting it too much. So that's what I'm going to work on next. Hopefully I don't have to wail on it with a hammer or anything. The instructions actually say you might have to. Nope. Perfect. All right, I kind of screwed up a little bit. I removed the nuts and bolts from the gear case when actually I was supposed to remove these 2 bolts, lock washers, and nuts from underneath and remove the entire bracket. And now I see why. Because they're going to want me to slide this impeller out, and to be able to do that, I need to be able to clear this bracket. So this thing's in my way. I'm going to go ahead and remove this hardware and do it like I was supposed to in the first place. I've rotated the entire snow blower up, so now it is laying on its front, and that's going to make it easier to get at these bolts, maybe a little bit easier, but there's some nuts underneath here that I've got to remove, and I'll show those next. But there was no way I was going to be able to do that with it in its normal position. These are those carriage bolts and those nuts that I was talking about. This is actually the bottom of the snow blower, and there's not very much room here. So with this thing sitting on the floor, it would have been nearly impossible for me to get good access to those. So we want to loosen those, not tighten them, right? Try that. That's better. Now with those loose, because I have it up on its end, this whole bracket is going to come loose, so I want to be careful it doesn't fall. So I'll support that. And it's all loose. Well, I've run into a little bit of a snag. I need to remove the impeller from the gearbox shaft. The gearbox is on the other side of this housing, but it will not come out no matter what I do. I've heated it, I've smacked it with a hammer. It just will not budge. So I'm going to take my Sawzall and I'm going to cut through that shaft on the other side, and I'll be able to get everything apart. And once I do that, it's not going to matter anyway, because I've got to install this new gearbox with the new shaft on it anyway. So as long as I don't want to go back to my old setup, I won't need that gearbox. I'm just tired of fighting it. We're going to let the Sawzall do the work. So I thought I was going to use my Sawzall to cut through that shaft, but it was just too hard for the Sawzall to be able to get through it. I'm sure it's some kind of hardened steel, and if I would have had a different blade, maybe that would have worked, but I decided to switch gears and go to an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. The gearbox was positioned about like this, and I only had about an inch clearance between this surface on the gearbox and the snowblower housing, made it really tight. And the impeller, of course, was on the other side. Once I was able to cut through the shaft, well, now the shaft was still stuck inside the impeller. So I had to use a hydraulic press to get that popped out. So per the directions, I had to mark out where I'm going to be drilling a hole, and I'm going to do this to both sides. Now I want to deburr the holes. Right now there's this edge sticking up from where my drill went through the steel. So I took out the 3/8 bit, I put in a 1/2 inch bit, which is a little bit bigger. That's just enough to remove that sharp edge and put a nice little chamfer on there. I'll do that to the other side. So with the 3/8 holes drilled, I'm ready to move on to reassembly. And I do believe drilling those holes is the only modifications I have to make to the housing before I move on. This is the new gearbox. This is the one that I'm going to be installing. And this is the shaft that I had to cut on the old gearbox. Just because of the new configuration, they give you this new pulley and new gearbox. I'm not as far along as I would like to be. You know, when you're working on an old piece of equipment or something that's sat outside or been exposed to the elements, things rust and they just don't want to come apart the way you would like. And while it would be great if everything would just slide apart like it shows in the manual, that's not going to be the case. I have an older car that I like to work on. It's kind of a hobby, and things never come apart the way they should, but the car is like 55 years old, I think. So just give yourself a little bit of extra time when you're working on something like this and try not to get frustrated. Admittedly, I got pretty frustrated, but we got through it. Now on to the reassembly, and hopefully this is the easy part. So the manual didn't originally have me removing this plate, but I had to be able to get access to that shaft with my angle grinder. So I got that plate off. I'm putting it back on. I'll get that buttoned up real quick. And once I do that, then I'll mount the gearbox, and it's going to go under here, and the hardware will pass through these holes. I'm leaving the hardware that attaches the gearbox to this plate a little bit loose, so it's just finger tight. And the reason is you want this to be able to move back and forth. So once you get the impeller on the other side, you may have to adjust the position of the gearbox housing. That's why those holes are slotted like that. So what I'm doing now is cleaning out that bore on the impeller a little bit before trying to install it on the shaft. And the reason for that is, you know, it was stuck. So I know I've got some rust and some other corrosion in there. And what I want to do is get any of that out, because my concern is that I get this partway installed on the shaft and then it gets stuck. And I had that happen on another project I was working on previously, and it got on almost all the way, but I couldn't get it on the rest of the way, and then I couldn't get it off. And there was a lot of screwing around. I'm just trying to avoid that. So I think by cleaning this out a little bit, plus the WD-40 is not going to hurt, I think that's going to improve my chances of not having any issues. I've already hit both sides. I'm just doing it one more time, but I'm definitely getting a lot of, crap. So I think that's going to improve my chances. Now's the moment of truth. I'm going to slide the impeller onto the shaft. I don't think I'm going to have any issues. One thing I did do was I made sure the through hole on the shaft lined up with the through holes on the impeller. So if this is exactly straight up and down, then I know that should be the position the impeller has to be in when it goes onto the shaft to get that shear bolt hole to line up. Perfect, just like that. I got to put a nut on the other side, and then I'll adjust my depth of the impeller to make sure it's not rubbing on anything. Right now it seems about perfect, but I'll double check that on the back side. I double checked the position of the impeller in the housing. It's exactly where I want it. It's close to the housing, but it's not rubbing. So now all I've got to do is get these gearbox bolts tightened up, and we're ready to move on. So depending on your installation, you may or may not have had to remove the auger assembly. I did. So now I've got to get this thing put back in. Got to remember to put these bearings on there. And then hopefully it just slides right into place. Auger is installed. I can spin this and I can watch the impeller move. I can get a full rotation out of the auger as well as the impeller. No interference, no rubbing anywhere. Everything's tight. We're moving on to the next step. Now I'm going to slide the new drive pulley assembly into place. When I do that, I've got to make sure that I get this belt wrapped around the pulley on this new gearbox we installed. There we go. Make sure we're well seated. We are. Now I'll slide this bracket in, and there's a couple holes, one on each side. And these are actually the holes that the hardware is going to pass through, and also pass through those new holes we made with the 3/8 drill a little bit earlier. I rotated the snow blower up on its front to make it easier to get at the hardware under that bracket. So there's a total of 4 bolts. And one of the holes that we need to use is going to be that 3/8 hole that we made a little bit earlier. Now initially this thing came with carriage bolts, so they're square under the head, and that'll engage with the square hole in the snowblower assembly. Well, the holes we made are not square, they're round. So they send new bolts. So this is going to be the same size bolt, except it's not a carriage bolt, so it doesn't have that square under the head, and that'll allow it to go into the hole we made all the way. I think we're done. Everything looks good. The belt's still on this pulley. I was worried that was going to pop off when I was down there monkeying around. I'll go over the hardware one last time just to make sure everything's tight, that I didn't miss anything. Well, that's going to do it as far as installing this adapter kit on the snowblower. And, to be completely honest, I thought this adapter kit was going to be geared more towards modifying the tractor itself. It had nothing to do with the tractor at all. It was all about modifying the snowblower to work with the new tractor. And I'm happy about that. I'd rather not monkey with the tractor. It's brand new. So everything I did happened to the snowblower. I think we're in good shape. No huge surprises other than trying to get that impeller off. I think the next step is going to be to actually connect it to the tractor and make sure that it operates properly. And also when it comes to installing it, that there are no surprises and everything lines up the way it should. Because when the snow starts flying in a couple months, I want to make sure that I'm ready to go. I don't want to be monkeying around trying to fix something, or having alignment issues or whatever it is. So if that's something you'd like to see, I will be making a video on connecting the snow blower to the front of the tractor. I expect that to be a much shorter video than what this was. If you're not already a subscriber and you enjoy watching stuff like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you like the video, hit that thumbs up. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Be safe. Enjoy the rest of your day.